In this video, you'll learn to locate lesson plans in SBCEO portal. I'll provide a brief overview of lesson plan page, and then I'll create a multimedia and multimodal lesson that includes the Smithsonian website, an interactive timeline on the site, video, a Twitter account, and where students will role play. You'll want to visit www.sbceoportal.org, then log in with your username and password. Each link and icon will take you to a different website where you can generate lessons for students or resources to manage and organize your classroom. For example, the Assign a Day icon is a web tool that allows teachers to create a calendar specific for their teaching needs. Here's a sample. You can add assignment name and description for any date on the calendar. Rubastar is also a great site for those of you who wish to have students write essays. You pick your topic. Let's say I'm going to have students do a lab report. Make sure you fill in your name and the project name, and then at the bottom you start to create your categories. So from the drop-down menu, I can have a category for their drawings. Rubastar will automatically create each criterion and its score. You can change the wording of any box or the scores. Once you completed the rubric, you scroll down to the bottom, click Submit, and there you go. We have a complete rubric. If you teach in a computer lab or have a computer and internet access in the classroom, it's a great idea to have students involved when you generate the rubric on Rubastar. Students could debate about the wording of the rubric, the scoring guide, and include other categories that they feel important to them. For example, this rubric asks for clear and accurate diagrams. How do students interpret this? Ask them to provide an example. What you often find is that what teachers expect differs from what students expect. I'm going to look at one more site from the lesson support page and create a more in-depth lesson. In this activity, I'll have students read information on Apollo 11. They'll visit the Smithsonian website, and they'll create a Twitter account and conduct in a role-playing activity within the computer lab. On the Thinkfinity site, I'm going to select Teacher, since I'm a teacher, then click Submit. On July 20th, we just celebrated the 40th anniversary of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on Moonwalk. Seems like an interesting topic. You could search for lesson plans in your subject area by using a keyword search on the right side of the screen. My goal is to create an interactive lesson in which my students learn about the moonwalk and take on different characters who partook on the voyage, including the astronauts, engineers, flight directors. How do I plan to do that? Check this site out. Toward the bottom of the screen is an interactive timeline of Apollo 11's voyage. I'm just going to enlarge it so you guys can see it better. Included are the dates and times of each event. Students can watch and listen to the first steps on the moon. If students choose, they can view pictures or read a description. Some of the icons only have pictures and descriptions. The next thing I'm going to do is have my class create their own timeline of the Apollo landing using Twitter. You can view a sample of Twitter by clicking on this link. What you see here are status updates in real time as events unfolded. So at 8:34 a.m. Pacific time on July 22nd, Apollo 11 was 28,421 miles from the moon. What I'm going to have my students do is select one of the events from the timeline, like the shuttle launch, the first steps on the moon, the placement of the U.S. flag, the return to Earth, etc., and assume a character. Students could be Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, an engineer, the flight director Gene Kranz back in Florida, President Lyndon B. Johnson, Nikolai Podgorny, President of Russia, Walter Cronkite, the famous newscaster. Students will be expected to provide updates on their own Twitter account describing what is happening, what they are feeling, what they are thinking, what problems they are seeing, what solutions do they have. Students can be creative with their updates. They can even be a bit silly. They just can't create updates that contradict with the evidence on this website. or with any reading materials I hand out to the class. Now, let's go create that Twitter account. You'll need to visit twitter.com. Once you arrive to the home page, select Get Started, Join. I'm going to have students use the real names of these astronauts and flight controllers. Because others may already have Neil Armstrong as a username, I'll need to be creative about adding some numbers after his name so I can create my count. At this point, you'll have to have your entire class create their accounts, and then students will have to choose to follow their friends. The way students will find their classmates is they have to select Find People, type in the name that they're looking for, and then select Follow. And then on their home page, they'll be able to see all the status updates of their classmates. This part of the process will take some time for students to create their accounts and then to find their classmates in order to follow them. What you may find is that many students want to be Neil Armstrong. If you have a large class, you can have several students team up, so 2 or 3 students could be Neil Armstrong. I would do this in 2 ways. I could divide the workload by having student 1 do the first third of the moonwalk, student 2 do the second third, student 3 do the last, and so on. Or I could have students assume different rhetorical tasks. So one student is responsible for what is happening, another describes his feelings, and the third student describes the problem's solutions at hand. I would recommend this probably with older students. Now that each of my students have their accounts, and we've explored the Smithsonian site as a class and read information in hardbound form about the Apollo landing, I'm ready for my activity. Beginning on July 16, 1969, with the launch of Apollo 11, I'm going to have the student playing the flight director post on Twitter the status of the shuttle. The next student who's playing the role of the engineer checking the status of the shuttle will put his or her update on Twitter. The students who are playing the role of the astronauts will provide an update on what they're thinking and feeling. All students have to pay attention to the timeline and await their turn to provide a Twitter status update. As a teacher, I will guide students through the timeline, calling out various characters to provide their status update. For example, Neil Armstrong, there's 3 minutes until launch. What's going through your mind? Buzz, do you need to go to the bathroom yet? Buzz Aldrin, by the way, was the first man to pee on the moon. President Johnson, is this a momentous event for America? President of Russia, how annoyed are you right now? When we come to the 10-second countdown, I'll have the whole class jump in on Twitter. We'll proceed with the timeline of events until Apollo 11 lands safely on Earth. The fun thing about this activity is that even students impersonating engineers back on Earth could still provide updates on Twitter about the status of the shuttle, even though the timeline doesn't directly describe this information. This forces students to think critically about events outside a timeline, like the one on the Smithsonian site. I could even have some students impersonate the family members of astronauts. Students can even play the newscaster Walter Cronkite. You could ask students, what were Americans' attitudes about the Apollo launch? And have students impersonate the average Americans, or even the President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. What did the Russians feel about this launch? Have students impersonate the President of the time, Nikolai Podgorny. Once students have completed the timeline using Twitter, the next class activity is to actually review each of the status updates and have students discuss which updates contradict the evidence the class had collected thus far. This will teach students to be critical of their writing and to use evidence from the site and other resource materials to confirm or reject any of the updates. To teach students about language and writing, you can have students analyze the language of the status updates and have a discussion about word meaning, voice, tone, and audience. How would the message change if Neil Armstrong had said, "One tiny step for people, one enormous jump for mankind"? You can also hold a discussion about technologies like Twitter that are being used to provide live updates of current events. What are the limitations of this technology? The advantages? How does it affect the way we write our history?